I'm here to share with you the challenges and solutions in the very wet West Coast. And I appreciate Heather for the invitation for a very different site type, and the committee for the support getting to this spot. And so sharing about 10 years now of Canarygrass experience with prevention and control at a watershed scale. So 10,000 Years Institute is a nonprofit organization that's 30 years old now, and I've been with them for 20 years. Started at the University of Washington with a group of graduate students, one of whom is still on the board, and the rest are still active in resource management and science in the region. And we develop a lot of science-based approaches to protecting and restoring resilient ecological and ecosystem integrity. So we have a number of different projects, and the most important one that I've headed up for quite a while now is related to invasive species influence in native dynamic habitats and forest lands and watersheds and rivers. And I have the pleasure of having worked on the Hoh River for 25 years. And I was here before knotweed started and before reed canarygrass started. And I've been working with those species since their inception in the river channel. And as you can see, there's a lot of channel migration. So I'll talk about the Pulling Together and Restoration Project, which we have funded through the Washington Coast Restoration and Resiliency Initiative, which is managed by RCO. We're really grateful for the flexibility of this program. It's essentially the Puget Sound Partnership for the coast. And we are doing quite a bit of applied science to try to describe and better understand the impacts of invasive plants on native ecosystems. So we have a reed canarygrass research project, a Scotch broom ecological impact research project. We just got funding to write up 20 years of knotweed data from the Hoh, one clump that evolved into 22 years of work, and herb Robert allelopathy I'm interested in studying. And we are looking at glacial retreat and biogeomorphic effect of invasive plants because we see how they change the dynamics, the geomorphology of river systems. And we're involved with eDNA for Olympic mud minnow and fish in small steep streams and other projects. And you can go to our website to check out what we're up to. So the context of the work that we've been doing over all these years, 1999 was when I first found, our stream typing crew found knotweed at a homestead at river mile 29.75. And by 2001, it had been captured and spread all the way down the river in pieces and was popping up on mid-channel river bars. And that started my effort to figure out what to do with it. And I was completely opposed to herbicide back in 2001. And so I researched propane burning and vinegar and digging and all kinds of things. And in community with Laurel Baldwin at Skagit System Cooperative and Kathy Lucero at Clallam County Noxious Weed Board and other folks who were working on it. And then with Lauren Ergenson's research at the UW, I learned that you really can't do anything but use herbicide. So I learned how to do it and do it well. And so I've been applying for funding ever since 2001 to deal with knotweed. And in 2022, we still have knotweed on the Hoh River in 30 miles. But it wasn't until 2010 that I was able to get funding for Scotch broom, reed canarygrass, herb Robert, Canada thistle. And it wasn't until 2016 that I started working on tansy ragwort. So I've been applying for funding all these years through all these different programs. I'm in the process of applying for the 5th biennium of Pulling Together and Restoration through WCRI, that's 22-1313. And I'll be presenting on that later this month. So that's a watershed scale regional approach, and it comes out of my frustration working on knotweed on the Hoh River, where I had to walk by all the other plants because there wasn't any funding and no understanding that they affect river processes and riparian plant communities and fish habitat. And so in 2013, I developed a program that focuses on sources, vectors, and pathways of invasive species, and not just noxious weeds, but invasive plants that are problematic. And this is Lake Crescent in Clallam County right here, if you see my cursor. And this is Highway 101 going all the way down. And all those dots are places that we have worked on plants. So we're working in Clallam County, Jefferson County, Grays Harbor County, and in the Wyra 20, Wyra 21, and in 8 watersheds from the Quileute down to the hump tulips. And on the coast here, we're doing a lot of Scotch broom. So with the flexibility in the programmatic WIC funding, it's just been amazing that we've been able to build lots of partnerships and regional capacity. We have up to 26 crew members. They're almost all complete. They're almost all local. We don't have to advertise. People are pretty underemployed out here on the coast, and they hear word of mouth and they walk in and ask for jobs. And I've trained hundreds of people in the methods and the practice. And one of the ways that we get buy-in is we provide services to landowners and managers, and we're working really hard to get projects developed. So every salmon recovery project that is proposed, we're encouraging and providing support to incorporate pre-project surveys and incorporate the plants in the project, and then do post-project monitoring. And we're teaching the landowners and managers how to do that. And we just do these repeated cross-boundary, persistent round the area surveys. We do roads numerous times a year. We do rivers several times a year. We're usually at most sites because we're dealing with different species with different phenologies and different growth habits. We're at multiple sites multiple times a year. And we can do that because we have such a big crew, and we're still, I'd rather have 1,000 people than 26. So we are developing these best management practices, and we check on our control efficacy, and we're always adapting what we do. And we are working on developing protocols. And I will put the Reed Canarygrass protocol in the chat, I'll link to it. And we track and report costs and benefits. So we have data, pretty extensive data on every single point, what we've done, what the conditions were. And then we can track what the small site population treatments cost versus when they get away and they go down 30 miles of a stream, and what it takes to do after things have gone to seed. And so we can do those comparisons, and we're using that information to inform funders and policymakers. And we've caught a lot of new species before they spread. We get so many tourists out here, lots of people bringing plants out accidentally or on purpose. So one of the ones I'm really glad we caught was giant reed on the Bogoshill River. It's reed canarygrass on steroids. It gets to be 30 feet tall. And a number of others. And so we're just training local folks and spreading the word through local communities, and the local jobs really makes a difference out here. We've gotten a lot of people who normally wouldn't be all that warm to me as an environmentalist, who invite us in to help them do their work. So I've worked on the Hoh River now for 22 years, starting with knotweed. And this is just an example of the 2020 through 21 species that we worked on. So the primary species, knotweed, Scotch broom, Reed canarygrass, herb Robert, and Canada thistle, we are working on 26 species, but those are the most of the ones. And that's 2,000 acres of surveys and treatment over the year. And we only treated in about 25 acres, if you condense it all down, but we have to search all of that multiple times. And Reed canarygrass really didn't start until 2009. And it was introduced through mowers. And I had to learn very quickly about it. And I was also learning about it in the Quinault and in the Solduck watersheds, where I was watching it act as what I understand from research papers is an ecosystem engineer. And I learned about how many seeds it has and how long they're viable. And when Hank just suggested 5 years is a good treatment timeframe, it is because seeds are pretty much viable for 4 to 6 years, and apparently from a burial project a long time ago, up to 30. But they're very mobile, and they move in water and wind, and especially with mowing. Haying is what introduced Reed canarygrass to the Hoh watershed. Homestead landowners who hay share mowing equipment with other watersheds, landowners in other watersheds where reed canary grass is what was planted. And that brought it in. And so you know what it does, but I have this slide here because some people aren't familiar with it. So I just always introduce it fully. And we know that it arrests the growth of native species. And we believe that it's probably allelopathic. There's only one thesis I've ever found on that, and it wasn't very clear. So it's a study that I hope to do. I am concerned about when Hank talked about applying herbicide and composting, basically making a planting bed out of the dead reed canary grass. I'm very interested in that. But I was concerned about allelopathy. And and it's constantly, I'll show you what our ordinary high water is like over in your area. I don't know how much you're starting to get more floods out of bank, but our ordinary high is way out of bank. It's the entire floodplain, basically. So we're working with all of these sources, finding where the plants are in these sources and trying to treat them there, trying to find NRCS funding for pastures on private lands, working with all of the roadside managers, at least to pull seeds off, if not to actually treat the plants. And we have numbers of wetlands that we work in, and we are encouraging no longer to use erosion control seed and hay bales. The reed canary grass pasture landowners, when they hay, they then sell the straw bales or the hay bales for erosion control cheaply to the state. And they end up in restoration projects or in ditches where then they start sprouting. I see a rectangular reed canary grass patch, and then you know. So we're encouraging to get away from that. And this is an example of one clump scattered like in a half mile, one clump on the edge of the Quinault River, where you can take the seeds off, stop them from moving in the water, pull all the stems out and bundle, and I'll show that more. So vectors, beavers are a problem for us, elk are a problem for us, bear are a problem for us in terms of moving seeds, as much as we love beavers for the work that they do. So we work on treating reed canary grass where beavers exist. Of course, people and mowing equipment, as I said, vehicles on roads, equipment generally, and then water definitely is a flow path and a vector, and then wind sometimes as well. So for prevention, our restoration strategies, we really have the opportunity in some of our watersheds to do early detection and rapid response. We don't, in 4 watersheds that I've worked a lot in, we have very little reed canary grass, and we just have to persistently go after these clumps, as is shown here. And Devon is pulling, so the river's fairly high at the moment. It's probably at about 2,000 CF or 1,000 CFS. It drops to as low as 300 in August and September, and it goes as high as 50,000, which is above my cursor. And so she's using a stick, so you can use a branch to lift, to go under the stems, lift that. She's already taken all the seeds off. Seeds are in this 30-gallon yard waste bag that we take back and burn or have to take to the landfill. And which we don't like, and pulls all of this up and over and puts the branch over on top of the clump and pushes the whole clump towards the upland, or bundles the whole clump, wraps it up, and then just sprays up into the clump, up and down, and no chemical, no aquanite, glyphosate, aquatic glyphosate at 1.5% with blue dye and clean water, municipal water, because the sediment, anything in water will bind and reduce efficacy of glyphosate. It's very sensitive. So that's what we do with that. So we do the roads, small clumps in pastures and on riverbanks, and we do seed collection on roads and small sites, and then the herbicide application. I'll talk more about that. We don't advocate mechanical digging or excavating, because then you've got hazardous waste and contaminated equipment that you have to manage, or seeds go elsewhere. We don't do covering because we have so much flow all the time that water covers and pulls away covering. We've tried it, and elk walk through it and just punch holes in it. We don't burn. Burning has its own impact to soil biota and to small-bodied critters. And we don't find that shading is particularly helpful. at least not in stopping seeds that are coming in from other places. We do some revegetation, and we definitely do a lot of monitoring. So one of the things that we are always asking folks when they say it's too expensive or too time consuming or too difficult or too damaging to try to stop reed canary grass. It's here to stay, and that's just the way it is. I'm asking these questions like, what's the value? What's the economic value? What's the ecological value of off-channel habitat that's filling in here? This is Joe Creek on the Upper Quinault. And so all of these attributes, all of these ecosystem services are expensive to recreate, are valuable as they exist. They have intrinsic value, they have economic value. And reed canary grass reverses all of those values. And then it has these cascading effects and impacts, filling everything, trapping sediment, as Judith so eloquently showed, and deoxygenating and warming water. And prey production is significantly reduced. The native chironomid larvae, black fly larvae, don't get produced. And amphibians can live in, frogs can live in reed canary grass, but they often can't breed well in it because of the lack of water in low flow conditions. And so then if you value fish, then you've got a cost and benefit that you can think about, and what does it cost to protect aquatic habitats, and then what does it cost to restore them? And my argument is it costs much less to protect. So that's what we're focused on. And here's an example of 4 watersheds that I work in on reed canary grass with roads and rivers. The Snahapish is tributary to the Clearwater, which is tributary to the Queets, the Hoh, and then Goodman Creek, which is independent tributary to the Pacific Ocean between the Hoh and the Bogashil. And the cost per mile for the stream on the Snahapish is $700. Once it got spread, it's $30,000 a year for this 14-mile stream reach, which is canyonized and very difficult to get in and out of. And so the 4 years of the seed viability is $120,000. We are in phase 3 right now, which just got refunded for doing the Snahapish. The Clearwater is about $500 a mile. It has much less reed canary grass in it. And we've done more work on it with the Quinault Indian Nation and others over the years. And so it's about $35,000 a year to do the Clearwater and $140,000 over 4 years. The Hoh, you could read all through that. And Goodman was, so a lot of these places are getting invaded from restoration projects and from monitoring projects of folks who walk through reed canary grass to get into the stream or are in reed canary grass elsewhere. And then there's Chimicum Creek. So this $3,000 an acre, 5 years for bulldozing and replanting. I'm gonna go one more, is that's Chimicum Creek in East Jefferson County with endangered summer chum. And it was planted with Sitka spruce and there were root wads put in and there was a bulldozed channel cut through here. And it has to be redone every 5 years. And that costs $3,000 an acre. So it's a lot cheaper to go get it early is our point. And this is an example in a side channel of the Upper Quinault River, that beautiful blue glacial water. No other reed canary grass in it anywhere else, but here's one patch. So there's a 1/4 mile of channel and one clump here. Diving in there, getting the seeds off, bundling this up and spraying it. Not very much impact and a lot of benefit. So with Salmon Recovery, I'm really looking at it and I'm thinking, I'm watching like the Chehalis, I'm watching the Solduck and the Bogashil and the Quileute fill in. And I'm understanding that just the huge sense of overwhelm and the sense that there's nothing that can be done and it actually looks like it's providing a service and maybe it is doing the blue carbon sequestration, but it certainly isn't providing the green carbon sequestration of 200-foot tall Sitka spruces that are 12-foot in diameter for our area. And Sitka spruce aren't growing well in reed canary grass. So can we achieve success? What are we doing with all our investments if we continue to allow reed canary grass to invade? And I know all of you are trying at all your different levels, and we are too, and we're trying to figure out how we can get a program going, a statewide, at least a west side, but east side too, program going that fully funds reed canary grass. And so I mentioned climate change. I mentioned collecting cost to benefits data to inform support to get regulators and policymakers, fisheries folks at NOAA and NIMS who guide what happens at salmon recovery in salmon recovery projects to get focus on supporting reed canary grass, because habitat protection really matters and native plants are foundational to all of our ecosystem services, and passive restoration and maintenance costs far less than full-on restoration, both in ecosystem impacts and in cost. So I mentioned before that we do studies, and one of the studies we started with support from Coast Salmon Partnership and Foundation was a reed canary grass ecological impact study. And that's up in Irely Creek in the Upper Quinault. And we also have another site in the Bogoshill River. And it's been really hard to find representative sites. This one is very impacted by beaver. The beaver keeps making the channel a valse. And we can't fly drones. We can't do LiDAR in the park. So that's been problematic, but it's an amazing site to work in. And there's a lot of other research that's going on in there on cutthroat trout and coho and temperature and climate change. So we did a presentation to the Freshwater Science Symposium this year, and that's what that was from, and you can find that. I can send a link to that. And then the study metrics are those, and we are looking to find additional sites and additional project areas and additional partners. I will say there is not one paper on reed canary grass impact to salmon habitat and cold water ecosystems. All the research on reed canary grass, except for a little bit that's done on the Columbia River, Amy Board and others. Everything else is in wetlands, and most of it's from the middle parts of the United States. So we need some more research. And so the project strategies, I can't quite see all my, I have something in the way. Okay, project planning. Our recommendation is to break down all the actions needed to do into achievable steps to include all invasive species in salmon recovery project planning and proposals. We need to articulate the need and the rationale, why it is that it's so important to be fully funded. I'll tell you, when I get asked the question in my RCO surfboard project proposals, what will it take? How many years will it take? And how much money will it take to get to maintenance? I'm honest, I'm saying $1 million per watershed in some of these. I'm saying for the first year, $1 million, then $500,000 for the next 4 years, then $250,000. But there's $20 million being spent on salmon recovery. So it is in support of that. And I'm just making the argument that if we don't ask for what we really need, we're never gonna get it. So let's start asking for it. And so in the interim, before you can get funded, before you can develop a full project, do your roadside seed sources. Get rid of the seeds in small clumps. They'll end up going down ditches into streams and into wetlands and start populations that you don't know where they're at, and they will very quickly expand. ID all the sites that you've got that aren't invaded and protect them. Push the reed canary grass back. Don't let seeds come in. If you get a few stems in, get rid of them quick so they don't get going. And know the sources and the vectors and monitor the pathways. If you have a team that can get to know the watershed and just continually be looking as they're driving or looking as they're walking, you can get stuff really easily, often, or more easily and more often. And we have just had a lot of success with this EDRR early action. And we're happy to try to assist, even though we're way on the other side, and happy to host you if you'd like to come out and visit. Let's see here. I am not sure why I am not able to advance my slide, but let me see what I can do. Okay. There we go. So you all have all these different site scales, and I really appreciate and respect that. And I recognize there are different methods that folks are comfortable with. Every single one of those scales and methods are necessary. I'm going to go back to that slide. I didn't mean to go off of it. So the source position in the landscape matters. And I usually start with the highest up sources or the most vulnerable sources that are full and seeding out. And That's a tree planting bag with a paper grocery bag inside that is collecting seeds, and then we take those paper bags out and put them in the larger bags. That's a interesting spot up in the Olympic National Park. So the seed, and then so managing this with getting the seeds off, because glyphosate won't stop the seeds from being produced and dropped. Okay, so in the coastal watersheds where we've had, I don't know, 20 inches of rain in the last month and a half. We had a 50 cubic foot per second flow last November. I mean 50,000 cubic foot per second flow last November, which was a 50-year event. And so this is our ordinary high water mark on the Hoh River. This is River Mile 29. This is a homestead pasture and property. The Upper Hoh Road is across the river going up into the park. And so we work in all of these different parts of the floodplain and the uplands on reed canary grass and other species. But the fact that the river floods multiple times per year and often flows across the entire area and flows through all of these habitats, back channels, up onto roads, in the riparian, into ponds, pastures, and back in wetlands that are way back, means that we have a lot of places to look and to treat. So in this homestead parcel, which has eroded back 100 feet and this is a 700-year-old Sitka spruce. This is one that just fell in. They've had this since the late 1800s. And their pasture used to go out to here when I first started working down here. So glacial retreat is causing a lot of impact, a lot of aggradation. And they did get hay and mowing from a Clearwater property that had reed canary grass. So that was introduced, and this is one of their ponds that has reed canary grass growing around it. And you see the flow path from the high flow that carried reed canary grass all the way into the pastures and all the way down into the riparian. This is Ashley collecting seeds on one of the reed canary grass patches in the sedges and rushes and pasture grasses. So small patches of reed canary grass within their pasture land. They had polled Hereford cattle and Angus cattle for many, many, many years. So all the seeds are getting collected, and then the rushes and the sedges are pulled away and laid down so that they aren't going to be sprayed. And then the standing reed canary grass is separated into clumps and bundled for spraying. So that's one of our methods to keep everything else protected. And we find it's really effective, and we rarely get herbicide on the ground at all. Although with glyphosate, it binds so tightly with sediment, as long as the binding sites are not overwhelmed, that it degrades pretty quickly, and it doesn't move from there usually. But we do our best to protect everything, and we do that out in the forest as well. And so Roadsides, this is local folks mowing. So they mowed this reed canary grass patch at the edge of this hayfield in florets. Hopefully the seeds weren't ripe, but this often happens. And then the mower is just distributing the seeds all the way down. So getting to these early and getting it sprayed before it goes to seed, or getting the seeds off and spraying, is the way to stop that from going into, there's a whole stream coming down through here that's getting filled up. There's back channels over here, and the river's over to the left side. So we are working on protocols for the different species to try to pull together our practices and be able to share them and get other people's practices to include. And so there's the link to that, and I'll put it in the chat as well as soon as I can get there. And we would love to have you review it. And I know it's for a different habitat, regional area than you are used to working in, with a lot more water, but we would like to advance it and expand it to include very large sites and sites that have less flooding. And that's Rena in a floodplain, pulling out reed canary grass from the salmonberry and the native blackberry and native grasses and then that will be bundled and then sprayed. This is another site that we've worked on a lot. This is a off-channel habitat wetland, flooded wetland with a stream flowing down one side of it. It's backed up by an enormous Sitka spruce tree that fell into it. It does get flow from the river, but it's up it's perched on a terrace. And it was full of, this was it in 2017, full of reed canary grass. So let me go back. That's the same view. It was full of reed canary grass, and the blue is where we were spraying. So that's reed canary grass being sprayed with some blue dye in it. And then that's 2019 after the spray. It has been coming back in there. There are seeds. And so we are having to go back and retreat, but it's also full of fish and amphibians and native birds and native wildlife. And so we are working on it regularly. And have to spray way less now than we did back then. This is another wonderful site. Beavers dammed up. This was the Hoh River. It had Scotch broom and knotweed on it. It was a bar with Scotch broom and knotweed on it. Beavers dammed it up and filled it up with water. And when we were in here getting the seeds off that clump, I had fish nibbling on my legs. So the seeds were removed then. And the pond had no other reed canary grass or knotweed or anything else in it. So there's the dead patch now, the dead clump. When we waited to spray until the water had dropped way down. And then we sprayed the clump. And there are a few spots where we find a little bit of reed canary grass on a beaver dam, upstream and downstream of the ponded area, because there still are seeds and propagules in the watershed, but we are keeping track of it. And this is basically weed free. And it's 30 acres of habitat. And so I know that a lot of folks are focused on strategies for reducing the robustness of reed canary grass, and shade is one of them. And for us out on the coast where we have just constant wind events, we have constantly trees coming down and water flowing through. So the water in high water is flowing up to here through this forested floodplain from the river, carrying seeds from everywhere. And you can see how the reed canary grass just responds to the sunlight when a tree falls over. So we're covering so much area. If I was just working in one small space, I'd be willing to come in over and over and over and do the intensive treatments without herbicide that have been presented today wonderfully. But we need a tool that can cover a lot of ground and keep a lot of really important fish habitat from becoming invaded. So we see that with planting success that willow stakes seem to do well, but alder doesn't do well in reed canary grass, and we find that shade doesn't eliminate it. So this has deciduous, but it's completely overtopped with conifer canopy over where my crew is standing there. So one of the things I'm considering when I'm thinking about shading or what to do where is what the reinvasion probability is. Where are the sources? Where are the vectors? Where are the pathways to the site? What the maintenance effort and cost is, since we have limited funds and a lot of area to cover. And what the competition is that this is causing to the desired species. I'm curious about the allelopathy. I'm concerned about it and want to know more. And beavers and browsers are continually challenging. So I really am focused on getting rid of it as much as possible. So controlling for 2 years with herbicide and then maintaining after that, and possibly forever. We'll see what we can do, right, as a community.
Hey, Jill.
So yeah.
So we're quite a bit over, and people are starting to sign up.
I'm almost done.
Okay, all right.
Thanks, I'm almost done.
No problem.
Thank you for telling me. I'm not paying attention to time at all, and I appreciate that. So I'm looking at rebuilding regional plans and programs, and just to get everybody on the same page so that we can get a focus on reed canary grass to protect our cold water habitats and all of our salmon investments, salmon recovery investments, and just get those seeds off and bundle and spray. And I'll be happy to come over and show you how to do it. And this is another restoration site where we're doing the same thing, and it's looking really great. And then I just wanted to quickly talk about why I'm happy to use glyphosate. And I'm going to skip all of this, and I'm happy to talk to any of you about it. Glyphosate binds really tightly with sediment. You can't use stream water to mix it because it won't be an herbicide anymore. If there's any suspended sediment, it won't be. And the impacts of the alternatives, so I've heard about salt water and vinegar and covering, we obviously can't cover in these situations, and excavation, which has its own impacts, and burning. It makes me turn to that tool because I find that it is effective and fast, and that I can plant in it quickly, and that it is not harming. Everywhere that we work is full of native plants and the native biota that depend on them. And so it's the negative ions in glyphosate and the positive ions in soil that bind and basically at high adsorption rates that decrease risk and render it chemically inactive and mostly immobile. And so that's just what I wanted to share. And I know we can do it as a group. And I really appreciate everybody who supported our projects and everybody who waited till the end for this. Sorry for going over. And thank you so much. And I'd be happy to talk with you.